pay drivers are a concept as old as Formula One itself. Ever since the inception of the fastest open-wheel motor racing category in 1950, there have been a multitude of competitors who didn't just get into the sport purely due to their talent. Several members of royalty raced in the early years of F1, from Prince Birabongsi Banudej of Siam, now Thailand, to Alfonso de Potago, whose name was shortened from his full-length version of Don Alfonso Antonio Vicente Blas Angel Francisco Borja Cabeza de Vaca y Leitón Carvajal y Are, duodécimo Marqués de Potago, Marqués de Moratalla, 13º Conde de la Mejorada, Conde de Pernia, Duke of Aragon, Grande de España. A large majority of the drivers that came in the time since 1950 came from a wealthy background, or had sponsors to cover their expenses throughout their careers, and this has been a point of conjecture for some fans. In recent years, the likes of Lance Stroll and Nikita Mazepin have garnered negative reputations due to the fact that their families have an incredible amount of wealth, which not just helps them both advance throughout the junior ranks, but also help them enter the top echelon of European-based open-wheel motorsport, beating out potentially better candidates to seats they didn't deserve on pure merit. While Mazepin may have altered the career of Callum Ilott or Robert Schwartzman, both of which were in contention for the 2021 Haas seat that he eventually got, and Stroll might have scuppered Esteban Ocon's chances by going to Racing Point in 2019, it's safe to say that these examples, while potentially egregious, weren't completely unjust in terms of generational talents being denied an opportunity to show their true capabilities. Aside from the two examples of Stroll and Mazepin though, there is another driver who used his connections and not his talent to good effect, managing to stay in F1 for 5 seasons before eventually running out of excuses, before making a successful career switch over to another internationally renowned and highly skilled racing series. After a long-winded and convoluted introduction, let me tell you the story of a pay driver who killed not just one, but 2 careers. Marcus Torbjörn Ericsson was born on the 2nd of September 1990 in Kumla, Sweden. He began karting aged 9 after he drove at a circuit owned by ex-racing driver Fredrik Ekblom and nearly broke the lap record during his first session there. He would start seriously competing in karts from there, winning the MKR Series Sweden in 2003, then both the Nordic and Swedish ICA championships in 2005. He struggled when he moved up to European competition in 2006, placing only 12th in that series, but he moved up to single-seaters in 2007, having gotten backing from IndyCar champion and Indy 500 winner Kenny Brack. Brack convinced his ex-Formula BMW boss to put Ericsson into a seat with them in that championship, and he promptly took 7 victories on his way to the title on debut. Admittedly, it was a fairly weak field, with the only notable drivers being ex-GP2 prospect Joseph Kral, the late Henry Surtees who died at Brands Hatch 2 years later, ex-Virgin F1 test driver Adrian Quaife-Hobbs, and one-time IndyCar winner Carlos Huertas, but considering it was his first season racing cars, aged only 16 and 17, Ericsson did well. He moved up to British F3 in 2008, but struggled against more esteemed competition, placing 5th in the series behind future F1 prospects Jaime El-Jaswari, Oliver Turvey, Brendan Hartley and Sergio Perez, getting 5 podiums but no wins. Marcus made a switch from the UK to the Far East in 2009 as he embarked in a campaign in the All Japan Formula 3 series, as well as racing in the Macau Grand Prix. He won 5 races in his main series on his way to the championship crown, then got pole in Macau before finishing 4th in the main event. The Swede got his first taste of F1 machinery in this year as well, taking part in the Young Drivers Test at the end of the season in Jerez, as he competed alongside Mike Conway, who raced in IndyCar at the time. Ericsson made the step up to GP2 in 2010 and won the sprint race in Valencia, but his best result aside from that victory was a 6th place in Hockenheim, and he was only 17th in the standings. He went winless in GP2 in 2011 but got a best finish of 2 third places in Catalonia and Silverstone on his way to 10th place in the championship. Then the year after scored his 2nd triumph at Spa, along with claiming 8th in the series results. After 3 seasons in GP2, he hadn't finished inside the top 5, and this continued into 2013. Despite this campaign having one of, if not the weakest, second-tier grids in history, Ericsson placed only 6th in the season standings, as despite pole positions in Spain and Silverstone, he took just 1 win at the Nürburgring round and a total of 5 podiums, finishing behind Fabio Lima, Sam Bird, James Calado, Felipe Nasr and Stefano Coletti in the standings. Despite his lack of junior series results though, he was signed to a full-time Formula 1 seat in 2014, driving for the backmarker team Caterham alongside returning fan favourite Kamui Kobayashi, who had sat out the 2013 season after a moderately successful career, having spent the final 2 races with Toyota in 2009, then 3 years with Sauber before this. Kobayashi would be a good metric to measure Marcus's performance against, as the Swede would have been under pressure to perform in the top category after his years wallowing in the second tier. Ericsson made his debut at the Australian Grand Prix, and while Kamui dragged his car into Q2, his teammate was unable to replicate that form, 9 tenths behind in 20th. Then on race day, Marcus retired with oil pressure problems after having run as high as 11th place, then qualified last in Malaysia, 8 tenths off his more experienced counterpart. Both drivers finished line astern in 13th and 14th, but Ericsson was around 47 seconds adrift of Kobayashi at the checkered flag. Another 8 tenths was dumped on him on Saturday in Bahrain, but he had more oil leakage problems which forced him out of the race. He had a dismal weekend in China, 1.3 seconds down on Kamui in qualifying, then was 2/3 of a minute behind in the race. Ericsson outqualified his teammate for the first time all year in Spain, as Kobayashi was impeded on his final lap, then the Swede finished 20th as the Japanese driver retired. After starting last, 1.6 seconds off of Kamui in Monaco, he finished ahead of him for the first time all season in 11th. However, this was because Kobayashi had suffered extreme floor damage from Jules Bianchi, who had forced his way past the Caterham at Rascasse, making the slower green car lose 2 laps worth of lap time in the process. Ericsson was half a second behind in Canadian Grand Prix qualifying, then succumbed to turbo problems on lap 7. He was exactly 1 second down on Kamui on Saturday in Spielberg, then finished 18th, 2 places behind him in the race. Then in Silverstone, Marcus outqualified his teammate for the first time on merit all year, 2 tenths ahead, but retired with suspension failure on lap 11. After failing to set a time in Q1 in Hockenheim, Ericsson struggled to recover and placed 18th on Saturday, 2 positions and 40 seconds behind Kobayashi. He crashed out quite spectacularly at the Hungarian Grand Prix after qualifying 1.5 seconds adrift of his teammate. However, for the Belgian race, in Spa, he had a different driver occupying the second Caterham to usual. André Lotterer had taken over Kobayashi's seat as £150,000 in sponsorship money came in, and the 32-year-old German, who had last driven an F1 car testing for Jaguar in 2002, outqualified his Swedish teammate by a full second, despite his inexperience. Ericsson was the only team car to finish the race in 17th. Then after Lotterer had initially planned to race in Monza too, he rescinded that offer once it became clear that Caterham wanted to hand over his machine for the first practice session to Roberto Merri. Kobayashi thus returned, continuing to pull a healthy 9/10 gap on Marcus on Saturday before dumping 35 seconds on him in the race. Ericsson had electrical issues in qualifying for the Singapore Grand Prix, which put him 1.8 seconds off his Japanese counterpart, then he was the only one to finish for the Leafield outfit in 15th. Marcus had the measure over the full weekend for the first time all year, then did a similar thing in Sochi despite finishing 19th. However, after his team went into administration in late October with the prospect of them not returning, Ericsson signed a deal to drive with Sauber for 2015, which was announced at the 2014 United States Grand Prix. He had also terminated his contract with his current team early, meaning that Caterham had to find another driver to replace Marcus for the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi. Although the Swede's rookie season was cut off early, we can still analyse his performances. He only outqualified Kobayashi on merit 3 times out of a potential 15, and only beat him on merit in races once. It was obvious there was a stark improvement in both Suzuka and Sochi, which we may have potentially seen if Caterham had competed in Kota and Interlagos. However, in general, it was still a bad first campaign. Not only was he on average 3/4 of a second behind Kobayashi on Saturdays, but he was also embarrassed by André Lotterer when the German dunked nearly a full second on him in Spa. Ignoring the anomalous Monaco result which put Marcus clear of Kamui in the standings, he was on average half a minute behind his Japanese counterpart. You might see it as harsh that I'm explaining a rookie campaign in this way, especially considering his drastic ramp up in performance in his final 2 events, but I suppose his sophomore season would show more of what he was capable of. 2015 saw Ericsson paired with the Brazilian Felipe Nasr at Sauber, despite another 3 drivers having been told they were contracted to drive for the team. As well as Marcus and Felipe, 2014 Sauber driver Adrian Sutil claimed he had exercised an option to stay with the Swiss outfit, and so did former IndyCar competitor Simona Di Silvestro. Most notably though, 2013 Caterham driver Guido van der Garde was still fighting the team in court for the right to drive for them while the Friday practice sessions were going on. However, once the case was settled, Ericsson and Nasr competed in the opening weekend of the season in Melbourne. A strange race saw only 15 starters, as both Mana Mauritius failed to get out of the garage all weekend, Valtteri Bottas was injured during qualifying, and both Daniel Kvyat and Kevin Magnussen had issues on the way to the grid. This left Sauber with big opportunities to score points they otherwise didn't deserve, and while Nasr impressed, moving from a 10th place start to finishing 5th, Ericsson was 8th, a full minute behind. After scoring his first career points despite being so far behind Felipe, Marcus impressed in qualifying for the Malaysian Grand Prix, nearly a second clear of his Brazilian counterpart, although he did spin off on lap 3 in the race. He was 80 seconds off of Nasr in China, then continued to sit constantly around 3 or 4 tenths behind on Saturdays and up to 10 seconds adrift on Sundays throughout the race weekends in Bahrain, Spain and Monaco. He outperformed Nasr in Canada by finishing 2 places clear of him in 14th, but then was more than 75 seconds behind in the Austrian Grand Prix. He finished 11th in Silverstone while Nasr retired, then started a streak of his own good performances in Hungary, Spa and Monza, during the latter of which he was nearly 50 seconds clear of his Brazilian teammate as Felipe had issues on lap 1. He lost out to Nasr in Singapore, then finished 14th in Suzuka as only his car made it to the finish. Consecutive retirements in Sochi and Kota came before 12th in Mexico, then he was 25 seconds behind Nasr in the penultimate event in Brazil. He qualified a second behind his teammate in Abu Dhabi, the final round of the season, but finished 1 place ahead in 14th. The pair were fairly even on average on Saturdays, but Nasr had a clear advantage in race trim, as discounting caveats, the Swede was 20 seconds off the pace of his counterpart in the other car. He headed into his 3rd season, still alongside Nasr, but the Sauber outfit had a noticeable fall-off in performance from the year prior. Marcus outqualified Felipe in Melbourne, partly due to the stupid new elimination qualifying system, then retired due to transmission failure on lap 38. Nasr made a mistake on the only lap he could get in during the Bahrain Saturday session, meaning he was 1.5 seconds off of Ericsson and was unable to recover the gap in the race. Then he lost out in Russia and Spain too. Felipe had an engine failure in Monaco qualifying, then recovered in the race to be ahead of Marcus, but once the Swedish driver caught up, team orders were sent to Nasr to let him by. He spent several laps ignoring the command as he felt he was the faster of the two, then when Ericsson got bored of waiting, he sent a clumsy move at Raskas which gave them both sufficient damage to take them out of the race. Marcus was penalised by the stewards for his fault in the collision, then he outperformed Nasr in Montreal. Poor weekends in Baku, where Marcus was 45 seconds off Felipe, and Austria, where he was also behind, came before power unit problems in Silverstone, and another bad race in Hungary, where he was 20th while his Brazilian teammate was 3 places ahead. 18th in Hockenheim preceded gearbox failure in Spa, then he was only 16th in Monza. He had a 42-second deficit to Felipe in Singapore, as well as being 4 positions adrift, then he was 12th in Sepang while Felipe retired. A trio of good results in Suzuka, Kota and Mexico, where he outperformed Nasr, came before the Brazilian Grand Prix. To give some context for this race, up until this stage of 2016, the Sauber team hadn't scored a point all year, with Ericsson's 11th place finish in the land of tacos being their best finish. In a regular season this would be okay, as despite their bad form, you have to realise that Manor were also on the grid. However, just like 2014, where the small minnows had embarrassed the much larger Swiss outfit by scoring 2 points with Jules Bianchi, Manor had taken 10th and 1 point at the Austrian Grand Prix, courtesy of Pascal Wehrlein, putting them ahead and, crucially, in the final spot in the constructors' standings that would offer prize money to keep the team afloat. While Ericsson crashed out in the wet conditions early on, Nasr dragged his car into 9th place, superseding Wehrlein's results from earlier in the year and put Sauber into 10th in the constructors' table. He outperformed Marcus where it mattered, which should have seen Felipe retained for 2017, but this ended up not happening. Despite the Swede being slightly faster than Nasr in both qualifying and race trim on average, it was believed that there was some favouritism going on within the team which caused these results. Marcus was getting new parts first, and following their crash in Monaco, not only did team principal Manisha Kaltenborn suggest that both drivers were equally responsible for the collision, even though it was obvious that Ericsson understeered directly into his teammate, but apparently despite the implications of team orders being used against the Brazilian, there were several times before that already in the year where Marcus had ignored instructions from the pit wall to let Felipe through. Not only did the on-track circumstances prove some fishy behaviour, but the fact that Longbow Finance, an investment firm allegedly owned by 3 Swedish billionaires, took over mid-season, and that's about the point where Marcus started to exert an upper hand, is also very convenient. Despite Nasr literally saving Sauber from the embarrassment of finishing last in the Constructors' Championship, he was dropped for 2017 as Pascal Wehrlein moved over from Manor. It had initially been planned that Felipe would simply swap seats with Wehrlein, but the Manor team went bust before the start of the new season, which was due to them not getting the prize money that eventually went to Nasr's former employers. Ironically, had he done what Charles Pic did in 2012 by purposely sabotaging his current team to the benefit of the one he was going to join the year after, Nasr could have stayed in F1 longer. Even if Marcus had on average been faster, there were obviously things going on behind closed doors, because the dichotomy of the driver that spins off early on in the tricky wet conditions, while his teammate saves his team's entire season, is a perfect example of why Felipe was better. His peaks were far higher, and even despite constant legs up and helping hands given to Ericsson, Nasr still beat him 2-0 in the points standings. Even with his great potential, no open seats were left for the Brazilian in F1 for 2017 or beyond, so he switched to endurance racing, where he has won IMSA twice and is currently leading the 2024 season, which proves just how much of a talent he is. Whether by direct inference or by indirect meddling from biased affiliated parties, Marcus Ericsson killed Felipe Nasr's F1 career, despite being a worse driver during their stint as teammates. Surely though, heading into 2017 with a Mercedes Junior and another incredibly talented teammate, Ericsson would be showed up for his lack of skill and booted out of F1, never to return. The season would start off strangely, as Wehrlein was injured in a pre-season crash at the Race of Champions, meaning that for the first 2 rounds he would be replaced by Antonio Giovinazzi, who unlike Ericsson had shown promise in GP2. Surely though, a driver of Marcus's experience would have a comfortable upper hand over a literal rookie. Giovinazzi was only 2 tenths off of Ericsson in Q1 in Melbourne, as the Swede was the only one of the 2 to progress out of the session, then Marcus had hydraulics issues on lap 21. The gap was only 0.07 of a second on Saturday in China, and Ericsson finished 15th in the race while Antonio crashed out. Pascal returned for Bahrain and immediately dunked half a second on Marcus in his first qualifying back, then the Swede's gearbox failed on lap 50 when he was 10 seconds behind on Sunday. A poor last stint from Wehrlein in Sochi allowed Ericsson to finish ahead, and in Spain, Pascal put on the performance of his life to drag the Sauber into 7th on the road, 20 seconds ahead of Ericsson. In Monaco they suffered a double retirement, then Marcus showed his aptitude in Montreal by beating Pascal at the Canadian circuit, but lost out in both of the next 2 rounds in Azerbaijan and Austria. A very poor few in-laps before his pit stop in Silverstone allowed Ericsson to beat Wehrlein, then in Hungary Marcus himself lost out by a similar margin. Spa saw the Swede take 16th while Pascal suffered from suspension issues, then in Monza, Marcus himself had the same problem with just a few laps left. He crashed out on his own in Singapore, then Wehrlein dumped half a minute on him in Sepang before he had another accident in Suzuka. 15th in Kota was followed by engine trouble which forced him to retire in Mexico, then he got 13th in the penultimate round in Brazil before losing out to Wehrlein in Abu Dhabi as well. Across 2017, Pascal scored 5 points while Marcus scored none, with a similar finishing percentage and 3 of Ericsson's retirements being his own fault. You'd think that there would be no chance he would retain a seat with the team heading into 2018 instead of Wehrlein. While the pair were absurdly close in terms of average qualifying and race gaps, it was obvious at points who was Sauber's favourite, especially when it was the Swede who partnered Charles Leclerc in 2018. Just like Nasr before him, Wehrlein was unable to get another seat on the F1 grid and made his own path in Formula E, where he has just won the title in 2024. I've actually done a video on his career specifically, if you'd like to check it out in the top right corner of your screen. So just to confirm, up until this point, Marcus Ericsson had lost to Kamui Kobayashi, lost to Andre Lotterer despite having half a season's more experience than him, lost to Felipe Nasr in both the seasons they were together, scoring less than a third of his points in Felipe's rookie campaign, and then being mediocre while Nasr literally saved Sauber despite getting stiffed by heavily biased upper management, then somehow got the 2017 seat over the Brazilian which destroyed Nasr's F1 career. Then he got comprehensively beaten by Pascal Wehrlein, failing to score points when the German did twice, and while he had a few good races, crashed too often and just wasn't at the same level as his teammate. He then proceeded to kill Wehrlein's career too, as Pascal was unable to find a seat elsewhere, and Marcus got to drive alongside the reigning F2 champion Charles Leclerc. How in the ever-living fuck did this idiot fall upwards and constantly retain his place in F1, despite constantly proving that there were obviously better candidates than himself? There's no need to answer that question actually, the reason is clear. He had bags of money and juicy nepotism following him everywhere he went. Let's take a look at his 2018 season before I explode. He had a good first trio of races in Melbourne, Bahrain and Shanghai, beating Leclerc as the Monegasque acclimatised to F1. From there on in though, Marcus would only outqualify him twice and never outraced him. Charles was 1.8 seconds clear in Baku qualifying, then finished 10 seconds clear in the race, then dumped 8 tenths and 20 seconds in the respective Saturday and Sunday sessions in Spain. Leclerc had the upper hand throughout the Monaco weekend until his brakes went bye-bye into the back of Brendan Hartley, then he put 1.6 seconds on Ericsson in Montreal on Saturday before finishing 3/4 of a minute ahead in the race. It was 8 tenths and 50 seconds the gaps in Charles' favour in France. Then he had wheel problems in Silverstone after having dumped half a second on his Swedish teammate in qualifying. A poor strategy in changeable conditions in Hockenheim scuppered Leclerc's chances. Then Hungary was the first time in 9 races that Ericsson started as the lead of the Sauber duo. He got 15th while Charles had suspension issues. Then Fernando Alonso Airlines crashing into the World Trade Center and Leclerc opened up an opportunity for Marcus to claim his 4th points finish of the year. The gap was 18 seconds in Charles' favour in the Italian Grand Prix, then 27 in Singapore, and after putting 1.8 seconds on Ericsson in Sochi on Saturday, he dropped a full minute on him in the race. Successive retirements for his teammate allowed Ericsson to take another 10th place in Kota, despite having 1.5 seconds placed on his head by Leclerc in Suzuka qualifying. Then he was half a minute down in Mexico before a dismal weekend in Brazil saw him retire from collision damage. The last race of the season in Abu Dhabi saw Ericsson suffer power loss on lap 24, concluding what had been another unremarkable year. He scored only 9 points compared to Leclerc's 39, and for the 5th campaign in a row had been outperformed by a less experienced teammate. On average, the gap was 6 tenths to Leclerc in qualifying and more than 20 seconds in the race. Unlike the previous years though, Ericsson was not retained for a full-time role in 2019. There were rumours he would replace Kimi Räikkönen for the 2019 Belgian Grand Prix as the Finn was recovering from an injury, but this never happened. Looking at Marcus's record against his teammates is grim reading. He lost to every single one of them in terms of points standings or outstanding performances, and although you can make the argument that all of them are also fairly underrated in F1 circles, especially the likes of Kobayashi and Wehrlein, this is no excuse. Had Ericsson just been another pay driver akin to Max Chilton or Esteban Gutierrez, who did 2 or at a push 3 seasons in F1 whilst bringing in money and just helping the team around him where he could, it would have been fine. But it wasn't like that. He had 5 full seasons despite clearly having outstayed his welcome by the end of his 3rd, and instead of positively contributing to the team environment, he actively destroyed it through the constant nepotism and bias shown towards him, which most certainly destroyed the F1 careers of both Felipe Nasr and Pascal Wehrlein. He also didn't help the likes of Lotterer, who could have potentially done Monza and further if Ericsson gave up his seat for Merry in FP1, but added to this, the recent drama surrounding him and Logan Sargent is another point of contention. Since leaving F1, Marcus has had a reasonably successful IndyCar career, winning the Indy 500 in 2022, and through his moderately decent performances, he is making it harder for people who actually know what they're talking about to try and explain to deluded Drive to Survive fans who only watch F1 because they haven't got the attention span nor the brain capacity to focus on more than one series without shitting on it for no reason, and they think that F1 drivers are all infinitely superior to every other driver on Earth, and that all F1 rejects that go to IndyCar win everything, when that hasn't been true since the kart and champ car days, as Roman Grosjean has proven. Aside from my mini rant about annoying DTS fans, a few weeks ago, amidst rumours that have since been confirmed that Logan Sargent was going to lose his Williams seat for 2025, Marcus said in an interview that Logan and his team principal James Vowles were not on speaking terms, stirring the rumour pots further with all the talk about replacing him. As it turned out though, Sargent confirmed Ericsson was chatting utter bollocks, not his exact words may I add, and that his story was entirely made up. This lie being exposed gives us a kind of insight into what it must have felt like being his teammate at Sauber. I can imagine him sitting in team debriefs with better parts than Nasr and Wehrlein, yet still finishing behind them and trying to gaslight them into thinking he was the faster driver. Or maybe that's what he did with the upper management. Or considering the fact that he could pass for a stupid blonde, if you put some makeup on him, he could give some other quote-unquote favours to the big bosses in Switzerland. Anyway, before I get myself cancelled, I think that brings today's video to a close. I hope you enjoyed me detailing how Marcus Ericsson destroyed 2 drivers' careers, and if you did, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to see more content from me in the future. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to see exclusive content, get videos a day early, and have an opportunity to converse with me personally for as little as $1 per month. Big shout out to my already existing Patreon subscribers Andy Lamberts, Eamon Aldowdy and George Stratford, and you can also follow my X/Twitter account where I post boiling hot lava takes on F1, IndyCar and NASCAR, and follow my Instagram for behind the scenes updates. With my shameless plugging over though, I'm Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye!